The afternoon sun beat down on Trevor's shoulders as he stood at the corner of Maple and Winchester, right where the fancy neighborhood began. His hands gripped the handlebars of his bike so tight his knuckles had gone white. This wasn't just any bike. His dad had given it to him 3 years ago, back when everything was different, back when they were a real family. Trevor was 14, though people sometimes thought he was younger because he was thin. Not the athletic kind of thin, but the kind that came from not eating enough. His jeans were a size too big, held up with a belt that had new holes punched in it, further and further along as the months went by. He'd been standing there for almost an hour, watching expensive cars roll past. SUVs that cost more than his mom made in a year, back when she had a job. Every time a car slowed down, his heart would jump, but then they'd just speed up again. People in this neighborhood didn't stop for kids like him. They looked straight ahead, pretending not to see. A black Mercedes pulled up to the stop sign. Trevor took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising his hand in a small wave. The woman behind the wheel had perfectly styled blonde hair and sunglasses that probably cost more than his rent. "Excuse me, ma'am," Trevor called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Would you like to buy my bike?" The woman's expression shifted from surprise to something like disgust. She hit the gas and the Mercedes rolled away, leaving Trevor standing there with his arms still half raised like an idiot. He swallowed hard and stepped back onto the curb. "Don't cry," he told himself. "Don't you dare cry." The bike was a Mongoose mountain-style blue and silver. It had been the best gift he'd ever gotten. Trevor remembered the morning his dad rolled it out from behind the couch, grinning like a kid himself. "For my champion," his dad had said. That was before the accident. Before the medical bills. Before everything fell apart. Trevor ran his thumb over a scratch on the frame. He'd gotten that scratch racing down Miller's Hill with his best friend Danny. Danny had moved away last year when his family bought a bigger house in the suburbs. They didn't talk anymore. Another car approached, this one a silver Lexus. Trevor stepped forward again. "Ma'am, please," he said, louder this time. "I need to sell my bike. It's in great condition, barely used. I'll take whatever you think is fair." The woman in the Lexus actually stopped. She rolled down her window halfway, eyeing him suspiciously. "How much?" she asked. Trevor's mind went blank. He hadn't thought about a price. He just needed money. "Any money, $50? He said, though he knew the bike was worth at least $300. The woman laughed, not kindly. "$50 for a used bike from some kid on the street? No thanks." She rolled up her window and drove off. Trevor felt his chest tighten. He'd been doing this for an hour and was no closer to helping his mom. At home, she was lying on their worn-out couch, too weak to even stand. She'd been eating less and less, always saying she wasn't hungry, always making sure Trevor ate first. But yesterday, he'd opened the cabinet and found it empty except for a can of beans. The fridge held only a half-empty bottle of ketchup and some wilted lettuce. This morning, his mom hadn't gotten up at all. When Trevor checked on her, she was pale and shaking. "I'm fine, baby," she'd whispered. "Just tired. You go to school." But Trevor hadn't gone to school. He'd sat beside her watching her breathe and realized with cold clarity that his mom hadn't eaten in 2 days. Maybe longer. She'd been giving him everything, leaving nothing for herself. That's when he'd grabbed his bike. Now the sun was starting to drop lower in the sky and panic was setting in. He'd tried 4 more cars with no luck. One man had told him to get a job. Another had threatened to call the police if he didn't move along. Trevor was about to give up when a white Range Rover pulled up to the stop sign and actually stopped, even though there was no other car around. The window came down and a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair looked at him. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked. Something about her voice, about the genuine concern in it, broke something loose in Trevor's chest. "Please, ma'am," he said, and his voice came out desperate and raw. "Would you buy my bike? My mom hasn't eaten in 2 days and I don't know what else to do." The woman's expression changed instantly. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and got out. She was wearing expensive clothes, a cream-colored blouse and tailored pants, but she didn't seem to care about getting them dirty as she walked over to him. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Trevor." "I'm Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor." She looked at the bike, then back at Trevor. "This is a nice bike. That means something to you, doesn't it?" Trevor nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "How much do you want for it?" I don't know. Whatever you think is fair. I just need to buy food for my mom." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Trevor could see her mind working, could see the pity in her eyes. He hated that pity, but he needed it too. "I'll give you $200, she said finally. Trevor's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? Let me get my purse." As Eleanor walked back to her car, Trevor felt dizzy with relief. $200. That would buy groceries for weeks, maybe even help with the rent. Eleanor returned with her wallet and counted out the bills into his hand. Trevor stared at the money like it might disappear. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome, honey." Eleanor took the bike's handlebars. "Do you need a ride home?" "No, ma'am. I can walk." "It's not far," that was a lie. It was 3 miles, but Trevor didn't want this woman to see where he lived. The apartment building with the broken elevator and the graffiti on the walls. The eviction notice taped to their door. Eleanor seemed to sense his reluctance. She nodded. "All right. You take care of your mother, okay?" "I will. Thank you again." Trevor watched as Eleanor loaded his bike into the back of the Range Rover. Each movement felt like a goodbye to something he could never get back. But when he looked down at the money in his hand, he felt something else too. Hope, maybe, or just the possibility of another day. Eleanor drove away and Trevor started the long walk home. His legs felt lighter without the bike, but his heart felt heavier. Still, he walked fast, already planning what he'd buy. Bread, eggs, chicken, rice, vegetables, real food. Enough to make his mom smile again. What Trevor didn't see was the woman standing in the doorway of the Whitmore mansion, watching the whole exchange. She was a black woman in her late 50s wearing a simple gray dress with an apron. Her name was Betty Williams, and she'd worked as a housekeeper for the Whitmore family for 20 years. Betty's hand was pressed to her mouth, and her eyes were wide with recognition and horror. She knew that boy. She knew his mother, and she knew exactly why they were starving. As Eleanor's car pulled into the circular driveway, Betty stepped back from the door, her mind racing. She'd kept quiet for 6 months, telling herself it wasn't her business, that she couldn't get involved. But seeing that boy sell his most precious possession just to feed his mother, something inside Betty shifted. Some silences, she realized, were more dangerous than speaking up could ever be. Eleanor got out of the car, smiling at Betty. "Could you help me with this bike? I'm going to clean it up and donate it to the church charity." Betty nodded silently and helped her employer carry the bike into the garage, but her thoughts were far away, already planning what she needed to do next. The truth was going to come out. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. Betty stood in the Whitmore's pristine kitchen, her hands submerged in sudsy water as she washed the dinner dishes. But her mind was miles away, stuck on the image of that boy standing on the corner with his bike. Trevor, Diana's boy. She'd recognize those eyes anywhere, the same deep brown as his mother's. It had been 6 months since Betty had last seen Diana at church. They weren't close friends exactly, but they'd shared the kind of bond that came from both being black women working in spaces where they were often the only ones who looked like them. Diana had been a bookkeeper at Whitmore Industries, the company Mr. Gerald Whitmore owned. She'd been good at her job too, meticulous and honest to a fault. Then one day, she was just gone. Betty remembered the Sunday Diana stopped showing up at church. She'd asked around, but no one seemed to know where she'd gone. Some people whispered that she'd moved away. Others said she'd gotten sick. But there had been darker rumors too, ones Betty had tried not to believe. Now, watching the suds swirl down the drain, Betty felt sick to her stomach. That boy was selling his bike because his mother hadn't eaten in 2 days. Something terrible had happened to Diana, and Betty had a sinking feeling she knew exactly what it was. "Betty?" Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. "When you're finished there, could you bring some coffee to Gerald's study? He has his nephew over for a meeting." "Yes, ma'am." Betty dried her hands and prepared the coffee tray with steady movements, though her heart was pounding. Gerald's nephew. That would be Ryan Whitmore, the young man who'd gotten promoted to comptroller at Whitmore Industries about 6 months ago. Right around the time Diana disappeared, she carried the tray down the hall to Gerald's study. The door was slightly ajar and voices drifted out. Betty knew she should knock, but something made her pause just outside, listening. "I'm telling you, Uncle Gerald, we're fine." That was Ryan's voice, cocky and assured. "The Carter woman is working some minimum wage job now, if she's working at all. No one would believe her even if she tried to say something." Betty's breath caught. Carter, Diana's last name was Carter. I don't like it. Gerald's deeper voice responded. She was smart. What if she kept copies of something? Ryan laughed. Of what? We made sure every trail led back to her. The transfers, the account access, everything. Even if she had copies, it would just show that she was the one who did it. Still, $300,000 is nothing compared to what you owed those people, Ryan cut in. You had gambling debts that would have destroyed this family. I fixed it. We fixed it. That woman was collateral damage, and frankly, she should be grateful we didn't press charges. Betty's hands were trembling so badly the coffee cups rattled on the tray. She quickly steadied them and knocked on the door. Come in, Gerald called. She entered the room, keeping her eyes down the way she'd learned to do over 20 years of service. Gerald sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking older than his 55 years. Ryan lounged in one of the leather chairs, his expensive suit jacket thrown over the armrest. He barely glanced at Betty as she set down the tray. Will there be anything else, sir? Betty asked. No, thank you, Betty. She left the room, closing the door behind her. But she didn't go back to the kitchen. Instead, she stood in the hallway, her back against the wall, trying to process what she'd just heard. Diana hadn't stolen anything. She'd been framed. Gerald had gambling debts, serious ones from the sound of it, and he'd embezzled money from his own company to pay them off. Then he'd made it look like Diana had done it. And Ryan, his nephew, had helped him. Probably got a nice promotion out of it, too. Betty thought about the eviction notice she'd glimpsed on the apartment door when she'd seen the address while helping Eleanor with the bike. Thought about Trevor's thin frame and desperate eyes. Thought about Diana, wherever she was right now. Probably weak and sick and believing the whole world thought she was a thief. That evening, after the Whitmores had finished dinner and Betty was cleaning up, Eleanor came into the kitchen with a satisfied smile. I did something good today, Eleanor said, settling onto one of the bar stools. She often did this, treating Betty like a confidant even though they both knew the power dynamic between them. Yes, ma'am, Betty said, scrubbing a pot. That poor boy I bought the bike from, his mother hasn't eaten in 2 days. Can you imagine? In this day and age, in this country, people going hungry like that. Eleanor shook her head. I gave him $200. I hope it helps. Betty paused her scrubbing. Did he say anything about his mother? What her name was? No, he didn't. Why? Just wondering if it might be someone from church. We have a food pantry program. I could see if we could help. That's thoughtful of you, Betty. Eleanor smiled. You have such a good heart. Betty didn't feel like she had a good heart. She felt like a coward who'd stood by while an innocent woman's life was destroyed. After Eleanor went upstairs for the night, Betty did something she'd never done before. She waited until she was sure everyone was asleep. Then she went to Gerald's study. Her hands were shaking as she tried the door. Locked as she'd expected, but Betty had been cleaning this house for 20 years. She knew where the spare keys were kept. She retrieved the small key from the kitchen drawer where Eleanor kept odds and ends and returned to the study. The lock clicked open. Betty slipped inside and closed the door behind her, her heart hammering so loud she was sure someone would hear it. She'd cleaned this room 1,000 times, but she'd never really looked at it. Now she did. The filing cabinets along one wall, the desk with its locked drawers, the computer that was probably password protected. Betty started with the filing cabinets. Most were unlocked and full of boring business documents she couldn't make sense of. But the bottom drawer of the last cabinet was locked. She tried several small keys from Eleanor's drawer before finding one that fit. Inside were folders neatly labeled. Betty pulled them out one by one, her hands shaking. Tax documents, property deeds, and then a folder simply labeled 2024 Confidential. She opened it. The first document was a transfer record showing $300,000 moved from Whitmore Industries' operating account to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The authorization signature was Gerald's, but someone had altered it to look like Diana's handwriting. Betty had seen enough of Diana's signature on church volunteer forms to know this wasn't quite right. It was close, but not perfect. There were emails, too, printed out. Exchanges between Gerald and Ryan discussing how to handle the situation and make sure the trail is clean. One email made Betty's blood run cold. The Carter woman is getting suspicious. We need to act fast before she figures out what's really happening. Betty took photos of every document with her phone, her hand steadier now that she knew she was right. Diana was innocent, and these men had destroyed her life to cover up their own crimes. She was so focused on photographing the documents that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway until it was too late. The door opened. Gerald stood there in his bathrobe, his face going from confusion to anger in an instant. "What are you doing in my study?" Betty straightened up, the folder still in her hands. For a moment she considered lying, making up some excuse about cleaning. But she was tired of lying, tired of staying silent. "I know what you did," she said quietly. "I know about Diana Carter." Gerald's face went pale, then red. "You're fired. Get out of my house now." "I have photographs," Betty continued, her voice stronger now. "Of all of it. The transfers, the emails, everything. You're lying." "Am I?" Betty held up her phone. "I've been cleaning your house for 20 years, Mr. Whitmore. You think I don't know where you keep things? You think I don't hear things?" Gerald took a step toward her, and for a moment Betty was genuinely afraid. But she stood her ground. "If anything happens to me," she said, "these photos go to the police, and to the newspapers, and to everyone on the board of Whitmore Industries." It was a bluff. She hadn't sent the photos anywhere yet. But Gerald didn't know that. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I want you to tell the truth. I want Diana Carter's name cleared. And I want her compensated for what you took from her." Gerald laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Those people I owed money to, they don't play games. If I don't pay them, that's not Diana's problem. That's not Trevor's problem. You made a choice, and you made an innocent woman pay for it." "Get out," Gerald said again. "You're fired. I want you out of this house by morning." "I'll leave," Betty said. "But this isn't over." She walked past him, still holding her phone with its precious evidence. Her whole body was shaking, but she kept her head high. She went to the small room off the kitchen where she sometimes stayed when the Whitmores needed her for early mornings or late nights. She packed her few belongings into a bag. 20 years. 20 years she'd worked for this family, and it ended like this. But as Betty walked out of the Whitmore mansion at 1 a.m, she didn't feel regret. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt free. Tomorrow she would find Diana. Tomorrow she would figure out how to make this right. She didn't know if her photos would be enough. Didn't know if anyone would believe a black housekeeper over a wealthy white businessman. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Betty sat in her small one-bedroom apartment, the morning sun streaming through the thin curtains. She hadn't slept. How could she after everything that had happened? The photos on her phone felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She made herself a cup of coffee and tried to think clearly. Finding Diana wouldn't be hard. Betty still had the church directory from last year, and even though Diana had stopped coming, her address and phone number would still be listed. But what would she say? "Hi, I'm the housekeeper of the man who destroyed your life, and I have proof he did it." That seemed cruel, giving hope when Betty wasn't even sure what to do with the evidence she had. Still, she had to try. Betty pulled out the old church directory and found Diana's number. She stared at it for a long moment before dialing. The phone rang 4 times before a weak voice answered. "Hello? Diana, it's Betty Williams. From church. I need to talk to you. It's important." There was a long pause. "Betty, I'm not in a good place to have visitors right now." "I know about Whitmore Industries," Betty said quietly. "I know what they did to you." Another pause, longer this time. When Diana spoke again, her voice was trembling. "How?" "Can I come see you, please? I have something you need to see." Diana gave her the address, though she sounded reluctant. Betty recognized it as one of the older apartment buildings on the east side of town, the kind with water-stained ceilings and coin-operated laundry. An hour later, Betty stood outside apartment 3C, her hand raised to knock. She could hear movement inside, slow and shuffling. When the door opened, Betty had to fight to keep the shock off her face. Diana had always been a beautiful woman, tall and graceful with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes. The woman standing before Betty now was a shadow of that. She'd lost at least 30 pounds, maybe more. Her clothes hung off her frame and her eyes were sunken. She looked like she'd been sick for months. "Come in," Diana said softly, stepping aside. The apartment was small but clean. There wasn't much furniture, just a worn couch, a small TV on a crate, and a folding table with 2 chairs. Through an open door, Betty could see a bedroom with 2 mattresses on the floor. No bed frames, I'd offer you something to drink. But Diana gestured vaguely at the empty kitchen counter. I brought some groceries, Betty said, holding up the bags she'd stopped to buy on the way. I hope that's okay. Diana's eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. They sat on the couch and Betty pulled out her phone. I need to show you something. But first I need you to know that I worked for Gerald Whitmore for 20 years. I'm not working for him anymore as of last night, but I thought you should know that. Diana nodded slowly, her expression guarded. Betty opened the photos and handed Diana the phone. I overheard him and his nephew talking. Then I went into his study and found these documents. Diana's hands shook as she looked through the photos. Betty watched her face change from confusion to disbelief to anger, to something that looked like relief mixed with despair. They framed me, Diana whispered. I knew it. I knew I didn't do this, but no one believed me. Tell me what happened, Betty said gently. From your side. Diana set down the phone and wrapped her arms around herself. I'd been working there for 5 years. I was good at my job. I caught errors, I kept the books clean. I even found ways to save the company money. Then about 8 months ago, I noticed some irregularities, money being moved around in ways that didn't make sense. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. She paused, swallowing hard. I went to Gerald about it. I thought maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was missing something. He told me he'd look into it. 2 weeks later, the police showed up at my desk. They said I'd been embezzling from the company. $300,000, but you hadn't. Of course I hadn't. But they had transfer records with my authorization. They had access logs showing I'd been in the system during off hours, which wasn't true. They had everything. My lawyer looked at it and said it would be impossible to prove my innocence. The evidence was too strong, Diana's voice broke. I couldn't afford a trial. I'd already spent everything I had on the lawyer just to review the case. He said the best thing to do was not fight it, take a plea deal if they offered one, but they never charged me. They just fired me and made sure everyone knew why. No charges meant no trial, no chance to defend myself, just rumors and destroyed reputation. No one would hire you after that, would you? Diana laughed bitterly. Every application I filled out, every interview I got, they'd call Whitmore Industries for a reference. And whatever they said, I never got the job. I finally stopped putting them on my resume, but then I had a 5-year gap in my work history. That was just as bad. She gestured around the apartment. I lost my house. My car got repossessed. We moved here because it was all I could afford. And now I can't even afford this. We're being evicted in 3 days. What about Trevor's father? Diana's face crumpled. James died in a work accident when Trevor was 11. The company he worked for fought the compensation claim. By the time we got a settlement, most of it went to paying off the medical bills from his time in the hospital. What was left I'd been using to keep us afloat this past year. But it ran out 2 months ago. Betty reached over and took Diana's hand. I'm so sorry. I've been doing odd jobs when I can. Cleaning houses, yard work, anything that pays cash. But I've been so tired lately. I think I'm sick, but I can't afford to see a doctor. And Trevor? Her voice caught. Trevor sold his bike yesterday. The bike his father gave him. He came home with $200 and this smile on his face like he'd saved the world. He doesn't know I saw it was gone. He thinks I don't realize what he did. The woman who bought it was Eleanor Whitmore, Gerald's wife. Diana looked up sharply. She knows who Trevor is? No, she has no idea. She thought she was just helping some random kid. Diana laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's almost funny. The wife of the man who destroyed my life, giving my son money because we're so poor. And she doesn't even know. Betty squeezed her hand. Diana, I want to help. I want to make this right, but I need to know. Would you be willing to fight if you had the chance? If we could prove what really happened? With what? Diana gestured at the phone. Some photos you took? Gerald has lawyers, good ones. And I have nothing. Not even enough money to buy groceries. What if you had a lawyer? What if someone was willing to take your case? Betty, I appreciate what you're trying to do. But no lawyer is going to take on Gerald Whitmore based on some photos. Even if they're real. Even if they prove what he did, lawyers like money. And I don't have any. Betty sat back frustrated because Diana was right. The photos were evidence, but evidence alone wasn't enough. They needed someone willing to use it. Someone who understood what it meant and was willing to fight a powerful man. There was a lawyer, Diana said slowly. At the beginning, when this first happened, his name was Tom Bradford. He looked at my case for free at first, said he thought something didn't add up. But when I couldn't pay his retainer, he had to drop me. He seemed like he actually cared, but caring doesn't pay the bills. Do you still have his number? Somewhere, maybe. Why? Because now we have evidence. Real evidence. And sometimes that changes things. Diana looked skeptical, but she got up and searched through a box in the corner. She pulled out a folder of papers and handed Betty a business card. Tom Bradford, attorney at law. His office was downtown in one of the older buildings. Not the fancy high-rise where the corporate lawyers worked, but respectable enough. I'll call him, Betty said. If he says no, then we'll figure out something else. But Diana, you need to let me try. You need to let someone help you. Why? Diana asked, and the question wasn't defensive, just genuinely curious. You worked for that family for 20 years. Why risk everything to help me? Betty thought about it. I saw Trevor yesterday, standing on that corner trying to sell his bike. He looked so scared and so brave at the same time, and I realized I'd been seeing things for years and doing nothing about them. Little cruelties, little injustices. I told myself it wasn't my place to say anything. That I needed my job, that speaking up wouldn't change anything anyway. She met Diana's eyes. But your son was willing to give up the thing that mattered most to him to save you. And if a 14-year-old boy can be that brave, then I can be brave too. Even if it's 20 years too late. Diana's eyes filled with tears again. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Let me make some calls first. But Diana, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll eat. And you'll go to a free clinic if there is one. Because we're going to fight this and I need you to be strong enough to see it through. Diana nodded, wiping her eyes. Okay, I promise. Betty stayed for another hour, helping Diana put away the groceries and making them both lunch. It felt good to do something concrete, something helpful. The photos on her phone were important, but this mattered too. Making sure Diana had food in her stomach and knew she wasn't alone anymore. When Betty finally left, promising to call as soon as she'd talked to the lawyer, Diana stood at the door and watched her go. Betty, she called out. Betty turned back. Thank you for believing me. I should have believed you 6 months ago, Betty said. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. As Betty walked back to her car, she felt the weight of what she was about to do settling on her shoulders. She was going to take on a wealthy, powerful man. She had no job, no resources, and no guarantee that anyone would listen to her. But she had the truth. And sometimes, if you were brave enough and lucky enough, that was enough. Betty sat in the waiting room of Tom Bradford's law office, her phone clutched in her sweaty palm. The office was modest, with worn carpet and outdated magazines on the coffee table, a far cry from the sleek corporate offices she'd glimpsed when dropping off Eleanor at various appointments over the years. She'd called that morning, and to her surprise, Tom had agreed to see her right away. Any case involving Whitmore Industries interests me, he'd said on the phone, his voice cautious but curious. Now, waiting to be called in, Betty felt doubt creeping in. What if he laughed at her? What if the photos weren't enough? What if she'd thrown away her job, her income, her whole life for nothing? Ms. Williams? A young woman appeared in the doorway. Mr. Bradford will see you now. Betty followed her into a small office lined with law books. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his early 40s, with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood and extended his hand. Ms. Williams, please have a seat. You said on the phone this was about Diana Carter? Yes, sir. Betty settled into the chair across from him. I worked as a housekeeper for the Whitmore family for 20 years. Until last night. Tom leaned forward, interested now. What happened last night? Betty took a deep breath and told him everything. About seeing Trevor sell his bike. About recognizing him as Diana's son. About overhearing the conversation between Gerald and Ryan. About the documents she'd found and photographed. She pulled out her phone and showed him the photos, watching his expression change as he scrolled through them. He spent a long time looking at each image, his frown deepening. Finally, he set down the phone and looked at Betty with something like wonder. Do you understand what you have here? Evidence that Diana didn't steal that money? More than that. This is evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. This is evidence that could put Gerald Whitmore and his nephew in prison. He paused. May I ask why you're bringing this to me and not the police? Betty hesitated. I guess I'm not sure the police would listen to me. I'm just a housekeeper, and Gerald has money and connections, I thought. I thought Diana needed a lawyer first, someone who could help her understand what to do with this information. Tom nodded slowly. That was smart. You're right that going directly to the police could be complicated. The Whitmores would lawyer up immediately, and there'd be a lot of questions about how you obtained these documents. I stole them, Betty said bluntly. I went into his study without permission. Does that make them inadmissible or something? It's complicated, but let me worry about that. What matters right now is that Diana has a chance to clear her name and potentially recover damages. The question is whether she's willing to fight. She is. But Mr. Bradford, she doesn't have any money. She's being evicted. She hasn't eaten properly in weeks. I don't know how. I'll take the case pro bono, Tom interrupted. I should have fought harder for her the first time. I let the lack of payment stop me from doing what was right. I won't make that mistake again. Betty felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. The Whitmores won't go down without a fight. And Ms. Williams, you need to understand something. You're going to be a key witness in this case. They're going to come after you. They'll try to discredit you, they'll dig into your past, they'll make your life difficult. I know, Betty said quietly. I've already lost my job. What else can they take? Tom's expression was sympathetic. A lot, potentially. But we'll do everything we can to protect you. And Diana. Can you bring her here? I need to meet with her, go over everything, make sure she understands what we're getting into. Betty nodded. I'll bring her this afternoon if that works. That works. And Ms. Williams? What you did took a lot of courage. I hope you know that. After Betty left, she called Diana and told her about the meeting. Diana's voice was shaky but hopeful. He really said he'd take the case for free? He really did. Can you come this afternoon? I'll pick you up. Betty, I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me when this is over. Betty spent the rest of the morning doing something she should have done immediately. She backed up the photos. She emailed them to herself, saved them to cloud storage, and even printed out copies at the library. If something happened to her phone, the evidence wouldn't disappear. She picked up Diana at noon. Trevor was at school, which Diana said was good because she didn't want him to know what was happening yet. Not until I'm sure it's real, she explained. The meeting with Tom Bradford lasted 3 hours. He went through everything methodically, asking Diana detailed questions about her time at Whitmore Industries, about the day she was accused, about everything that had happened since. Diana's voice grew stronger as she talked, as if finally being believed was giving her back something she'd lost. Tom explained what would happen next. He'd file a civil suit against Gerald and Ryan Whitmore for fraud, defamation, and wrongful termination. He'd also be reaching out to the district attorney's office with the evidence of embezzlement. It would take time, he warned. Months, maybe longer, and it would get worse before it got better. They're going to say terrible things about all of us, Tom said. About you, Diana, because they'll claim you're lying to avoid prosecution. About Betty, because they'll say she stole these documents and that they're fabricated. They have resources and they'll use them. I don't care, Diana said, and she meant it. Let them say whatever they want. I know the truth. My son knows the truth. That's what matters. As they left Tom's office, Diana turned to Betty. I need to find work. Something that pays. I can't keep accepting charity, even from you. You're not accepting charity. You're accepting help. There's a difference, and Betty, I'm serious. And actually, I might have an idea. But let me make a call first. Betty called her daughter Keisha, who worked as a manager at a hotel downtown. Keisha had been horrified when Betty told her what had happened at the Whitmores, but also proud of her mother for standing up. Now Betty explained the situation with Diana. She needs work, something that pays cash if possible until this legal situation is sorted out. I know the hotel sometimes hires for housekeeping or the kitchen. Do you think? Bring her by tomorrow, Keisha said immediately. I can't promise anything fancy, but we need people. And Mom, you need work too. You can't live on your savings forever. Betty had been trying not to think about that. At 58, with no reference from her last employer and a reputation that was about to get a lot worse, finding a new job was going to be nearly impossible. We'll figure it out, she said, more confidently than she felt. That evening, Betty sat in her apartment and did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. Not the quick prayers she said before meals or the routine ones from church services, but real deep prayer. She prayed for strength for Diana and Trevor, for the courage to see this through. She prayed that doing the right thing would be enough. Her phone rang around 9 o'clock. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Betty Williams? The voice was cool, professional, female, yes? This is Rebecca Whitmore, Gerald's sister. I think we need to talk. Betty's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The threats, the intimidation, the lawyers. I'm listening, she said carefully. I know what you did. I know about the documents you took and the lawyer you've hired. Gerald called me furious. He wanted me to help him fight this, and there was a pause. And I told him no. Actually, I told him to go to hell, but that's between us. Betty sat up straighter. I don't understand. I've known for years that my brother had a gambling problem. I've been cleaning up his messes since we were kids. But framing an innocent woman, destroying her life to cover his own mistakes, that's a line even I won't help him cross. Rebecca's voice was hard. I can't testify against him. He's still my brother, but I'm not going to help him destroy you or Diana Carter either. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know that not everyone in this family is like Gerald. And because I want you to know that when this goes to trial, if you need character witnesses or documentation about Gerald's gambling, I'll provide it. Not in court, but to your lawyer, privately. Betty didn't know what to say. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this to be kind. I'm doing it because I'm tired of protecting people who don't deserve it. Good luck, Ms. Williams. You're gonna need it. The line went dead. Betty sat there for a long moment, phone still in her hand. Then she called Tom Bradford's office and left a voicemail about the conversation. Things were moving now, gaining momentum. There would be no turning back. 2 days later, the lawsuit was filed. By that evening, it had hit the local news. Former employee sues Whitmore Industries CEO for fraud. Betty watched the coverage with her stomach in knots. They had a reporter standing outside Gerald's mansion, another outside Tom Bradford's office. They showed a photo of Diana from her employee ID looking healthy and professional. They showed a photo of Gerald looking powerful and intimidating in an expensive suit. Betty's phone started ringing. Reporters wanting comments. She ignored them all, just like Tom had instructed. But then there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, Eleanor Whitmore stood there, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. How could you? Eleanor demanded. After everything we did for you. 20 years, Betty, 20 years I treated you like family. No, ma'am, Betty said quietly. You treated me like help. There's a difference, and we paid you well. We gave you Christmas bonuses. You paid me to clean your house and keep your secrets. And I did that for 20 years. But when your husband destroyed an innocent woman's life, that was one secret too many. Eleanor's face crumpled. He says it's all lies. He says that woman did steal that money and you're helping her cover it up. Do you believe him? Eleanor didn't answer, which was answer enough. Go home, Mrs. Whitmore, Betty said, not unkindly, and maybe ask yourself what else he's lied about. As Betty closed the door, she realized something had shifted inside her. For 20 years, she'd been afraid of these people, afraid of losing her job, afraid of their power, afraid of what they could do to her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She'd already lost everything they could take. And what she'd gained, her integrity, her self-respect, her courage, was worth more than all of it. The battle was just beginning, but Betty was ready to fight. The next 3 months were the hardest of Betty's life. The Whitmores came at them with everything they had. Their lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to get the case dismissed. They argued that Betty had stolen the documents illegally, that they couldn't be trusted, that this was all a scheme cooked up by a disgruntled former employee and a woman trying to avoid accountability for her crimes. The local paper ran opinion pieces questioning Betty's motives. Anonymous comments online called her a liar and worse. Someone spray-painted thief on Diana's apartment door. Trevor got into a fight at school when a boy called his mother a criminal, but they didn't break. Tom Bradford worked tirelessly, building the case piece by piece. He brought in a forensic accountant who analyzed the documents and testified that the signatures on the transfer records had been forged. He found the offshore accounts where the money had actually gone. He interviewed former employees of Whitmore Industries who'd noticed irregularities, but been too afraid to speak up. And then came the breakthrough. Rebecca Whitmore, true to her word, provided documentation of Gerald's gambling debts, credit card statements, loans from shadowy lenders, threats from people who weren't used to waiting for their money. She also provided something even more valuable, a recording. Apparently, Rebecca had been so fed up with her brother's behavior years ago that she'd started recording their phone conversations. On one of those recordings from 8 months earlier, Gerald admitted to Rebecca that he'd borrowed money from the company and couldn't let that bookkeeper find out. With that recording, everything changed. The district attorney, who'd been hesitant to take on such a prominent businessman, suddenly became very interested in the case. Criminal charges were filed against both Gerald and Ryan Whitmore. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. The charges carried serious prison time. Betty watched it all unfold from the small apartment she now shared with Diana. After Diana had been evicted, Betty had insisted she and Trevor move in. It was cramped, but it was better than the street. And somehow having them there made Betty feel less alone. Diana had gotten a job at the hotel where Keisha worked, doing housekeeping. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. Trevor had taken on a paper route before school, determined to contribute. Betty had finally found work too, cleaning offices at night. It wasn't what she'd done before, but it was honest work and it paid the bills. They were surviving. Barely, but surviving. Then came the day of the settlement hearing. Facing the criminal charges and the mounting evidence, Gerald's lawyers had approached Tom about settling the civil case. They were willing to pay, they said, if Diana would sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop her claims. Tom had looked at Diana across his desk. It's your choice. They're offering $500,000. That's enough to change your life. But I'd have to stay quiet about what they did. That's the deal. Diana had looked at Betty, then at Tom. No, I want my day in court. I want everyone to know the truth. I don't care about the money. Diana, Betty had said gently. Think about Trevor. Think about your future. $500,000 is a lot of security. And what do I tell my son? That I took money to stay quiet about an injustice? That I let these men buy my silence? Diana shook her head. I can't do that. I won't, Tom had smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Because I think we can do better. He'd been right. With the criminal case moving forward and more evidence coming to light every day, Gerald's position had gotten worse and worse. The company's board of directors had forced him to step down. Major clients were leaving. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with success, was now associated with fraud and corruption. 3 days before the trial was set to begin, they got a new offer. $2 million to Diana for wrongful termination and defamation. A public statement from Whitmore Industries acknowledging that Diana had been falsely accused. And no non-disclosure agreement. Diana had cried when Tom told her. Betty had cried too. Take it, Betty had said. This is what we fought for. The truth coming out and you getting justice. So Diana took it. The day the settlement was announced, Betty and Diana stood together outside the courthouse while reporters shouted questions. Tom Bradford stood beside them, professional and proud. Diana Carter was an exemplary employee who was falsely accused of embezzlement to cover up crimes committed by her employer. Tom read from a prepared statement. Today, justice has been served. Ms. Carter's name has been cleared and she has received compensation for the tremendous harm done to her. We hope this case serves as a reminder that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is above the law. The reporters kept shouting questions, but Tom ushered them away. As they walked to his car, Diana turned to Betty. What now? She asked. Betty smiled. Now we figure out what comes next. What came next surprised them both. A week after the settlement, Diana sat down with Betty and Trevor at their tiny kitchen table. I've been thinking, Diana said. I'm good at bookkeeping. Really good. And there are a lot of small businesses out there that need help, but can't afford a full-time bookkeeper. What if I started my own company? Freelance bookkeeping services. That's a great idea, Betty said. And I was thinking, you should be my partner. Betty blinked. Me? Diana, I don't know anything about bookkeeping, but you know about running a household, managing budgets, organizing things. And more than that, you know about people. You know how to read a situation. That's valuable. Diana reached across the table and took Betty's hand. I wouldn't be here without you. I wouldn't have my life back without you. Let's build something together. Betty felt tears welling up. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, so they did it. Diana used part of the settlement money to lease a small office space and buy equipment. They called it Carter & Williams Bookkeeping Services. Diana handled the numbers, Betty handled the client relationships and operations. Trevor worked there after school, filing and organizing, learning the business. It started slow. Their first client was a small restaurant owner who'd heard about Diana's case and wanted to support her. Then came a hair salon, a landscaping company, a boutique. Word spread about the two women who'd taken on a corrupt businessman and won, who were now helping small business owners keep their books honest and their finances clean. Within 6 months, they had 20 clients. Within a year, they had 50. The money from the settlement was carefully invested. Diana bought a modest house in a good school district. She set up a college fund for Trevor. She donated to the church's food pantry and to legal aid services that helped people who couldn't afford lawyers. Betty used her share to help her daughter, Keisha, finally go back to school to get her degree. She bought herself a reliable car, and she started a small fund to help other domestic workers who found themselves in difficult situations. But the best thing the money bought was peace of mind. The security of knowing they'd never have to go hungry again. The freedom to make choices based on what was right, not just what they could afford. The criminal case against Gerald and Ryan Whitmore took longer, but eventually both men were convicted. Gerald got 6 years in prison. Ryan got 4. They'd both be out eventually, but their reputations were destroyed. The company, now under new management, had changed its name and was slowly rebuilding. Eleanor Whitmore had divorced Gerald shortly after his arrest. She'd kept the house and most of the assets that weren't seized by the government. Betty heard through the grapevine that Eleanor had become a different person, quieter and more thoughtful. She'd started volunteering at a women's shelter. One day, almost 2 years after everything had started, Betty and Diana were in their office going over the books for a new client when there was a knock on the door. Betty opened it to find Eleanor standing there looking nervous. "Mrs. Whitmore," Betty said, surprised. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," Eleanor said quickly, "but I needed to apologize. To both of you." Diana had come to stand beside Betty. For a long moment, the three women just looked at each other. "I knew," Eleanor said quietly. "Not all of it, not the details. But I knew Gerald was hiding something. I knew something was wrong. And I didn't ask questions because it was easier not to know. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for what he did to you, Diana. And I'm sorry for how I treated you, Betty. You were right. I never treated you like family. I treated you like you were invisible." "Thank you for saying that," Diana said softly. Eleanor nodded. "I also wanted to return something." She pulled out a set of keys. "To Trevor, his bike. It's been in my garage this whole time. I couldn't bring myself to donate it. I think I always knew it would need to go back to him." Betty took the keys. "That's kind of you. It's the least I can do." Eleanor turned to leave, then paused. "What you both did standing up like that, it took real courage. I hope you know that." After she left, Betty and Diana looked at each other. "Should we give Trevor his bike back?" Diana asked. Betty thought about it. "Let's ask him. He's old enough to decide for himself." That evening, they showed Trevor the bike, cleaned up and looking almost new. They told him he could have it back if he wanted. Trevor stood there for a long time looking at the bike his father had given him. Then he shook his head. "Sell it," he said. "Use the money for the business or for someone who needs it more than I need a bike."